This is Remote Daily, your daily dose of inspiration. This is Remote Daily, an oasis of innovation for your mind, your soul, and your heart. Connect, act, and recharge with Remote Daily. This is Remote Daily.
What a soft start into this week. This is Remote Daily and Felix. And here is the new Remote Daily co-host, Susanna Schrobsdorff, together with today's guest, comedian and co-founder of the Nova Collective, Lisa Beasley. Susanna, the mic is all yours.
Thank you so much, Felix, for inviting me in. It's so good to see all your faces. Lisa, so happy to see you.
Hey, girl.
On a screen where we belong, we're
right.
I never get to see Maddie though, so I'm happy to see her.
Yeah, she's here.
Yeah. Oh, look at you. Look at you. Hey baby. Hey. So the questions that we've gotten in the chat, and I don't know if you're seeing those, are amazing. I'm going to start with a couple of my own, but I'm going to turn to those pretty quickly because they're incredible. This topic is one I'm sure anybody who has been in a workplace or near a workplace or virtually or otherwise has thought about in the last year, given all the upheaval and the racial reckoning and everything that's happened in the last year. I don't think we have come to any kind of new understanding yet. I think we're still in progress, which is, I guess, how we're always going to be. But I wanted to start with you personally. You are still a working comedian in addition to your work with the Nova Collective, which is the company you co-founded that works with other organizations to help them understand how to be more diverse, more inclusive, propagate equity, as it were. You also have a 5-year-old, as we see. Your impression of Margaret Thatcher on The Crown went viral a little while ago. So if for anybody, you should know that Lisa is also Margaret Thatcher when she wants to be. I guess what I wanted to say is, like, what's the overlap between being a comedian and helping people with diversity? And does humor help at all?
Oh yeah, before I forget, I want to say humor helps because being a comedian gives me a pass to say things that other people in, professional work environments can't say. So I definitely take that liberty. I'm also the creative director of my company. So that also gives me an extra pass where it's like, I'm creative and I'm cool and I'm funny. So I can say things like F white supremacy, and it's taken. So I do take that liberty and that privilege of that seriously, of just being able to say what I want to say. The overlap came when I wanted to be an actor my entire life, ever since I was 5. The overlap came when I realized how hard it was for me as a Black woman in America to navigate the industry. And I spent a lot of my life, preparing myself, doing the things, going to acting school, being talented, doing the plays, doing the commercials, doing the things. And then I get to a certain level in my career and I started to notice these stop gaps because I was a Black woman. A thing to know about me is that I grew up in Gary, Indiana with, can you let the dog out? So you go ahead and let the dog out. Yeah, that's going to happen a lot today, y'all. I grew up in Gary, Indiana, which was like 99.9% Black. And then I went to an historically Black university right after that. So my integration with, the rest of society really didn't happen until I was 21. So I've always held this extreme confidence in who I was, and I wasn't aware that I was invisible to people, or that people were unaware of my existence, or that they had so many questions or didn't know a lot. So the overlap definitely came with, it was selfish at first, where it's like, I am trying to get into this scene and it is so hard and it hurt so bad. And then I started to notice the structural infrastructure of higher ups. That was where the problem was.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I think you and I are able to have some of these frank conversations just because you're funny, and because you're right, you get to say the things that some people are thinking and may not be able to say, right? That's a trick in itself, because as we know, a lot of the corporate conversations around race are very awkward, and people are terrified of saying the wrong thing. And I guess I wanted to ask you, tell me a little bit about Nova Collective. What does it do? I noticed that you guys talk about diversity and inclusion, but equity. What is equity? We all know what diversity and inclusion, but what does that mean?
Are you rousing the dog up? He's riled up. Take him. I have an idea. Take him upstairs and play. You need my help? You do. Give me 1 second, y'all. Come on, y'all gonna go upstairs and play.
This is awesome. This is how it should be. My little one was just trying to get into the room. She was banging against the door, crying. So I was just shutting off the microphone. But Lisa is handling this way better than me. I was just hoping for somebody to solve the problem for me. So that's
somebody will rush in. How old is your child, Felix?
6 and 2. It was a 2-year-old.
So Lisa, so tell me, what does equity mean, and why do we need it? I think that.
So you notice that people talk about inclusion differently. So you'll have companies, they'll have a DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. They'll have D&I, which is diversity and inclusion, or I and D, because some people think inclusion comes before diversity. It's all the same thing. What has been, equity has been coming more to the forefront as people understanding the difference between equality and equity. Mm-hmm. Equality is 2 apples over here, 2 apples over there. Equity is you need 2 apples, but I need 3 for us to be at the same place. So there's this graphic where everybody can see over a fence. You know what I'm talking about, Deborah. Everybody can see over a fence, but the stairs are different. Right. It's different heights. And so for some people, equity can be kind of uncomfortable because it seems like favoritism. Yeah. But then that's when you have to understand that because of the structure this world is set up in, some people need less to be more successful, and some people don't have access to basic necessities to be successful. So that's what equity is. It's not everybody being treated the same. Is everybody equitable? Another example of that is you have a person in your office who is hard of hearing. They may need a different type of materials to support them. Or you might have one person in your office that speaks 2 languages. They might need more resources. So it seems like they're getting more, but it's equitable because that there's fairness in equitableness.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. Excuse me, water. I promise this is not because I'm any uncomfortable, but let's talk about last year. Mm-hmm. That did in the Black Lives Movement. Mm-hmm. How that changed what you guys do at Nova, what it means.
Yeah. So in March of 2020, we were just like every other small business where we're like, oh, snap, are we going to be able to pay people? Oh, no, like it was devastating because we're 4 years old. So we were just hitting our stride only for it to be all, crumbling. And we made a lot of bank off of in-person meetings. It's also, we do this work in person. So after we made that adjustment, we're like, we launched Nova Digital, and now let's take these critical conversations on Zoom and getting used to like that flow. June, with the murder of George Floyd, when the Black Lives Matter movement sprung another like energizing moment, companies started calling us like we were giving away $1 million to every caller. And we received all types of requests. And I think that's when we stepped into our power of, we have to realize that some clients are not for us, because we do get some people that are just like, okay, so our Black employees are complaining. We just need something written up real quick to show that, we're paying attention, literally even in that tone. Then you have people asking us to write statements. You saw a lot of CEOs come out with a lot of statements, and we're like, well, that's not what we do, because we don't know you like that. We don't want you out here being like Nova said. It blew up our business in a way that was like, we told y'all needed this. Because what happened from the difference in this Black Lives Matter springing is there was this kind of, it's always been enough is enough, right? But then there was this layer of people coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, murder is wrong, but guess what? When I'm walking down the street and I have to step off the sidewalk onto the street, I don't like that either. When you call me out in an email and you're passive aggressive, you can't do that to me either. Hey, you're not paying me enough. Don't do that either. And I call it the great backlash of 2020, where a lot of people just started outing companies of like, they ain't treating us right. They put out this statement, but it's only 2 Black people here. So it's been very interesting, because sometimes we see the calls slow down and we're like, we're not about to wait for another brother to get killed for y'all to get excited about diversity and inclusion. Also, what people are beginning to realize, or what I hope they realize, because I might be too close to the work, it's not just Black and white, it's a global issue. And a part of that big issue is the way white supremacy functions in the world, and people's ability to recognize that as such. Because you don't have to be white to operate in white supremacist standards, and to and for your office to support like that, to support those things too. So I'm calling February, actually follow-up February, where we ask these businesses, remember in June when y'all was making all of these promises, how's that going?
Yeah, that is great. And I wanted to get into like some of the misconceptions, because I think a lot of people just went out and thought, well, we're just going to hire 10 Black people, or we're going to promote the people we have suddenly and extraordinarily. You've been really eloquent about talking about what kind of culture you have to create within a company in order to make those hires and those promotions and that culture better and more welcoming, so that people don't have a high turnover and that it actually works. So maybe what's the biggest what do they need to do, and what are they doing wrong?
I witness a lot of misconceptions because our business is like consulting recommendation based. So we do get a lot of people coming to us saying, we need this, we need that. Then we take a closer look and we're like, hey, what you actually need is this. So for example, talent retention is a big thing. We keep losing our employees of color. Help us recruit more employees of color. The answer there is no. We need to figure out why they're leaving in the first place. Before you bring any more in, we need to figure out what this culture is. Are y'all aware of what that culture is? What needs to be reworked? Because also it goes so deep, because then you even find out that the hiring practices are biased. The values are biased. The mission statement is biased. So they really got to like dig into their infrastructure to even be able to set up some of these changes. Another misconception is that maybe a workshop can do it. It took us 400 years to get here. This is a lifestyle journey. This is not you're gonna go to a workshop and then kumbaya start celebrating Kwanzaa. This is not this is not that. It takes, because especially if you're going into like a 50,000 person organization, you're doing major strategic communication shifts. If you're doing something around hiring practices, like these are major infrastructural changes. I'm sure y'all have seen, if a company wants to introduce a new logo, how many emails and how many threads. So when it comes to dismantling the patriarchy and systemic racism, it's going to take some years. It's going to take like a plan. It's going to take a commitment, and it's a long road. So it's something that you have to decide, like, okay, I'm in this journey personally and with my company.
So the heart has to be in it, I think, to change the culture. And I think, I'm just looking, and that kind of gets at a little bit of what Rajat said earlier, which was how do we make it not just lip service, right? How do you make it something else, something deeper? And I was just looking at it, and sometimes they are just playing lip service, which is part of the problem, right? And we know that there are a lot of numbers behind why this is good for companies. So they want to do it, but they seem to be struggling. And some of that has come out in some of the one-on-ones and the little group conversations that people have had, which can be super awkward. And I know that everybody here was talking about how do you have a conversation as an ally? How do you do this? Somebody else here said, Anne said, what are your thoughts on telling people to try to be less white? I mean, things can go really terribly badly if it's not handled right. So when you are setting up some of these conversations with staff about race, what do you have advice for people on how to talk, how to start this conversation without it going sideways?
Yeah, it's layered. I'll give the kind of like the personal one-on-one approach and then the company-wide approach. The one-on-one approach, I think for an ally right now that's important in this moment is self-education. The tricky part with and why I wouldn't want you to move so fast into action is because the tricky part is there's so much content out there. If you're steering yourself, if you're self-educating, you can get roped down the wrong rabbit trail. And be convinced that like, should I be supporting this movement or this movement? And, next thing you know, you're resharing the wrong thing. And then that makes you feel insecure about everything you see relating to this conversation. Then it was like, damn, do I have to go to the library and get an old school book? Like, what is it? So for me, the one-on-one approach is about listening, self-education, and understanding where your experience falls on the spectrum of the human experience that we're all living. Being aware of who you are and how you show up in spaces is very important, because being aware of how you show up in spaces may not be how you think you show up in spaces.
What's a good example of that? Like what? People think, well, I'm kind of woke, I'm all right.
For example, and I will preface this with saying that I hope I don't offend anybody with this language, but this is me just saying. For example, if you have a gay white man going into a space that presents as straight, he is treated like a straight white man. But sometimes this gay white man might wear his sexuality as a badge of oppression, not knowing that he shows up looking like the most privileged of us. So being aware of that is something white women have to be cautious of, because white women have also been under the thumb of the patriarchy.
Right.
And it takes so much clawing out to get to a level of success. I'm not a white woman. White women don't sometimes notice that they're putting what was put on them on the people beneath them. It's also small things of just being aware. Like, for example, start with researching the things you think you know, like women equal pay day. Women's equal pay day is for white women, acknowledging that they make 70 cents on the dollar. Then you have Black Women Equality Pay Day, where it's like, this is the time it would take for a Black woman to make what that white man made. Right. This is the months later it took for a Hispanic woman to make. So just even things like that of learning, like, hey, if I'm a white woman, maybe I don't want to be going up so hard over white woman equal pay day without mentioning that there are other women who don't even make this.
Yeah.
So it's a lot, because sometimes personally, I'm glad we're having like all these conversations and points of difference, but sometimes it does get frustrating because it's all educating from the lens of what is not the cis straight white male road. And it's everything is other. So that to be an ally and be like, I gotta know everything. Damn. That's I don't know how that feels. My lane is more so learning how to advocate for myself, which also comes with its own shit. It's a part of, for example, when you have companies that only have a few Black people, and they realize that they want to do diversity and inclusion, they often go to that person or those people and say, hey, I want to do this. And it's just like, what? So advocating and allyship, there are both things that if you're advocating for yourself or for others as an ally, it's a lot of self-education. It's one of those things where it's inconvenient, but be grateful in the privilege that you can turn it on and off.
Yeah.
That you can be like, I don't feel like doing this ally stuff today. I'm about to watch Jeopardy. You know what I mean? Yeah. That should be a motivator of like, I'm going to get this. And knowing that it is a lifestyle, it will and may take you the rest of your life. It's a practice. It's not a switch.
Yeah. Yeah. One last question. I know we're going to go to breakouts and there will be more conversations. Mm-hmm. Maddie's 5. Mm-hmm. When you look, and I love what we heard from Jade about envisioning this diverse group of people, what do you think the workplace might look like for her? What, like when you envision, what is she, when she grows up, will things be different for her? I
think work culture is going to be drastically different. Because of how we're forced to do remote now.
Yep.
There isn't going to be a pressure on location.
Yep.
Which will alleviate so much for people who like have a hard time getting around or navigating opportunities. For example, I'm gonna throw some numbers at y'all real quick. In America, the average median household income is $110,000 for white families. For Black families, it's $11,000. For, right? Danita said, what? It gets worse. It gets worse. For single Black women and single Black mothers, it's $0. For educated single Black women with children, it's negative $11,000.
I mean, the median, your household wealth.
Your household wealth.
Yeah.
We are at a deficit because we left our hometowns to go pursue a life, had to set ourselves up with that life, didn't have any money because nobody pays us. And it's just like this rippling effect on your life. Yep. So when I think about those numbers and her future, I think about how that deficit shouldn't be a thing. There's so many things that humanity is working on at large right now that the idea of work should even be just completely different. Like, for example, Americans are starting to realize, we work 300 hours a week. What's that? That's not healthy. So a lot of stuff with work is going to change. And I'm gonna be real honest. And I don't know if this is because of my journey and I'm projecting onto her, but if she grows up and is like, Mom, I want to backpack all over the world for the rest of my life, I'm be like, cool, get it. What you got to do.
There've been a lot of discussions during this remote work period, and especially with what went on in Texas, where so-called essential workers, which were people that they counted like pizza delivery, that they were expected to keep working despite the fact they had no water at home, or they were not paid. And I think we still have a lot of inequities to work on just generally and the way that we think about work. And I think Felix, in this environment at Remote Daily is one of the places where those conversations happen about how do you make work and bring it and let everybody bring their best selves, because it's hard, with things. And I mean, there's some people in the chat that are bringing out really great resources on compassion. Compassion's a great place to start, I think, when you're trying to figure out how empathy, finding a way to put your head and sort of, like you said, realize where you're coming from, which is harder to do than people think. And somebody I think was Eli and Dario was asking, do you recommend affinity groups in organizations, or does that just serve to separate people?
I was just looking at that. That's something that we're still further examining, because a few things about diversity and inclusion is that the spectrum is, you have people who need to understand what it means for them to be white in where they live. Yeah. Then you have people who, like, once you're past that and you're past once you get into thicker things like introvert and extrovert. Yep. Sometimes introverts at work are seen as not enthusiastic, or they're, judged for not being like, hi. And honoring those balances. Then you get into, which is where we're moving into, which is why I know work is going to be different for Maddie, is people starting to, it's almost, to me, it's kind of like the grad school of diversity and inclusion. Like, what is time? Do you look at time linearly or cyclically? Like,
Right.
you know, because it's not, it won't be able to fit into the 9 to 5 program anymore.
Yep.
So if affinity groups, I say yes, but I'm also coming from a place of being a co-founder of my own organization where I started an affinity group for people who like to smoke weed. So, you know, you do have the, and I have two white founders. I asked them, doing this work I know can be very exhausting. I was like, do y'all need a white lady cry group? Like, let me know. Like, because sometimes I think it's important when it comes to the space being provided for everybody. That's where you get that, like, hey, if I have a group, if y'all white women need somewhere to cry and be like, oh, I just don't feel like being not racist today, do what you got to do. I think the representatives from those groups should lead those groups.
Yeah.
And I think if it's a large organization, because we're at about 50 and under right now, if it's a large organization, the purpose of those groups should be to hold the company accountable to making sure this group is not overlooked and has what they need.
Like moms, which would encompass all, you know, a range of people. I'm going to defer to Felix, but I think we're ready for breakout sessions. You're amazing. And I think the fact that you are so honest and yet incredibly full of information that I feel like I don't get anywhere else. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're incredible. And there's the chat alone is worth, we got to save this chat, Felix, because it's pretty powerful stuff in the chat too, because people are responding.
Thank you so much. Here's virtual glitter for our guests today, Lisa Beasley, and for amazing co-host and future co-host of Remote Daily, Susanna Schrobsdorff.